Namaskar. I am Dr. K. Aggarwal, President Heartcare Foundation of India, immediate past National President IMA and Group Editor-in-Chief Meta. Welcome to our regular webcast. And today I have with me Ishi Khosla. She's a clinical nutritionist. She's also the founder president. When I say founder president of Celiac Society of India, we are talking about celiac disorder or celiac-like disorders. Celiac disorders, I remember that when I was in my medical college, it was only a passing reference. But now today we know that 1% of the society is suffering from celiac disorder. Let's concentrate on this webcast on celiac disorders, and nothing better than, and no better than Ishi to talk about it. Ishi, number one is that when we talk about celiac disorders, do we have a definitive data that it is 1 to 2% of the society?
Well, actually, in India, we have just a few studies, one done by AIIMS and one done by Dr. Ajit Sood. But more or less, I think we believe that in at least North India, it's 1%. But of course, we need much more epidemiological study to confirm that. But globally, also, it is consistent to about 1%. In some sub-Saharan areas, it is even 7 to 8%. But it is seemingly that is the figure. What is interesting is that since the 1950s till now, it has increased fourfold. That is something which is very, very grave. And I think we need to understand that this is a silent disease. It's almost a silent epidemic, simply because we're not diagnosing enough. I believe more than 95% of people remain undiagnosed. So I think the real picture will emerge when we diagnose more people, and it is many people who have it don't know they have it.
So celiac means gluten intolerance. How do we define gluten?
Well, gluten is a fraction of the protein in some grains, including wheat and also barley. And rye is RYE, which is basically a European grain. We don't grow it in India, so it's not so relevant for Indians. So prominently in the Indian context, it is really wheat and barley. And gluten is a protein which is a bit hard to digest for most humans, and 100% digestion is not there in any human being. But when people who have celiac disease, in a way that it destroys their gut, and their there is villus atrophy, which means that the absorption surfaces of the gut lining gets destroyed to an extent where we can have severe nutritional deficiencies. Typically, we see iron deficiency, we see calcium deficiency, magnesium, and B12, which are typically the nutrients that we are still battling in terms of deficiencies in the modern urban world, in spite of the surplus of food.
So when we talk about gluten, you talk about wheat and barley. In our traditional Vedic medicine, we always worship wheat and barley. Say we talk about Navaratras, and during Navaratra, we grow wheat grass, we grow barley grass, and both of them have been used as a detoxifying agent.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, that grass almost is like a symbol of fertility and good health. And yes, there must be some kind of a link between these. But essentially, in the Navaratras, we find that we are not supposed to be eating these traditional grains. And maybe it was to do with harvest time, where we stored grain for the period when grains were not there for us. Essentially, grains have been an integral part of the modern agricultural society, and they have undergone a lot of change. So the wheat varieties, the einkorn varieties, to now what we have, the hexaploid variety, there has been a huge change in the grain for good reasons. However, I think the change which happened during the Green Revolution, which was between the 1960s and 70s, has had a profound effect on our health. And perhaps that's a hypothetical situation. I mean, we cannot prove it, but maybe it is coinciding with the epidemic and the burden of diseases we are facing today, including autoimmune diseases and obesity.
What about beer? Beer is barley.
Beer is barley, but today in the Western world, non-gluten-free beer is also available.
No, in India, people who are sensitive to gluten, they should not
have
drink beer at all.
Absolutely not.
And then, so therefore, and what else apart from beer in alcoholic drinks? We have barley.
Well, there is good news that most of the spirits which are made out of grains which have gluten can be taken by people who are sensitive, unless they have other reasons not to take it, simply because the distillation process removes the gluten. So,
So even beer will be
no, beer is the only exception which should not be taken. Apart from that, by and large, all drinks are fine.
So the message is very clear from Ishiji that if you have a gluten sensitivity, if you are intolerant to gluten, and if you are on a gluten-free diet, don't take beer. And of course, and your alcohol. We are not advocating to take alcohol, but yes, alcohol. Those who take and who are taking it in moderation or a restricted amount, then most of the alcohols are gluten-free because in the distillation process, the gluten is taken out. Now we come back to celiac. When we say 1 to 2% of the society is suffering from it, we have talked about it. It is gluten intolerance, how to suspect and how to diagnose.
I think that's the biggest challenge, that the manifestation, the presentation of celiac disease is so diverse and so tricky that you can miss it so easily. We see it in our clinical practice. We have patients who are so typical and they come with abdominal pain and they have constipation or they have IBS-like symptoms. They can have hyperacidity. So those are the ones which we have a high suspicion index for. But there are a huge number of people who just don't present with any of this, and they can come with just simple skin rashes, or they can come for hair fall, or behavior problems, or depression and mood swings and anxiety, and we find out the cause in the gut. So it is so difficult to really, actually suspect celiac disease. Typical cases do get diagnosed, but the other part is in the simply the body weight. Typically when we say that there is malabsorption, logically that person who is not absorbing his food should be underweight. Saying that at all. We are seeing adults who are overweight, who are being treated for weight problems, and they get accidentally diagnosed with celiac disease. They are unable to lose weight. So we see they both the spectrum. So it's underweight, overweight, normal weight, extra intestinal symptoms, or no symptoms sometimes at all, and the patient is diagnosed by default. So here I must say that if you have a celiac confirmed diagnosis in the family, there is about 10 to 15% chance that there would be another family member who are the first degree relative suffering from celiac disease. However, there is new science to suggest that um, almost 100% of the first degree relatives will actually have some form of gluten sensitivity, which is now being looked at as a new entity called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So these are very new learnings, and that takes a whole new turn in terms of management of the disease. So in a simple way, we can say that if you have one celiac in the family, you must screen for celiac disease in all first degree relatives, and after that, maybe as a family, they should become gluten free.
So when we talk about so how to suspect and how to diagnose.
Yeah. So the main the serology is basically through the tissue transglutaminase antibodies and the anti-endomycelial antibodies. These are very highly sensitive tests. However, even these need interpretation. Sometimes we need to correlate it clinically. The gold standard for celiac disease diagnosis is the endoscopic biopsy, which can actually tell you the level of damage, and that is a final diagnosis. However, there are new forms of diagnosis which are now coming without the endoscopic biopsy. So these are new areas which are very relevant, particularly when the child biopsy through endoscopy.
So I'll ask some out of box questions.
Yeah.
My first is, how about trying a gluten-free diet, is it going to harm to a normal person?
It's a great question because a lot of people believe that going off gluten will equal to malnutrition and take away the main source of nutrients in their diet. Let me be very, very honest and clear here. If gluten is bothering you, it is the reason for malnutrition and malabsorption, and it will not allow you to make the most of the food that you eat, and therefore going off it will only promote your health and not deplete it. However, you must have a healthy gluten-free diet. Just a gluten-free diet is not enough. You need to ensure that you can just eat rice and potatoes and paranthas, and that will not equal to good health. Essentially, if your diet is generally healthy, you will start picking up more nutrients. In fact, you will be healthier. So, taking away wheat from your diet should not equal to malnutrition. Rather, it should improve your nutrition. So, there is really no harm in trying a gluten-free diet if you suspect it. However, taken just like a casual thing, and sometimes you eat it and sometimes you don't, will have no value. It needs to be done in a way that it is meaningful and you'd get the maximum out of it to prove it. But do not do it in the absence of a blood test. If you feel you're feeling better on any of the symptoms that you have been suffering all your life, be it something to do with your external body, skin or hair, or otherwise aches and pains, any inflammatory condition, if you are feeling better on elimination or reducing wheat in your diet, I think there is a case for further investigation and taking it to a logical conclusion. While I'm talking about this, I'd also want to mention that it's not only gluten, it's also many other grains which cross-react with gluten. So if you are trying to go off gluten, then it's in order to also avoid the grains which we know now for sure cross-react, which are gluten-free grains, including oats, corn, and soya. So there is absolutely no harm, but it should be done under supervision.
So I'll come back to a disease called Annadosh, mentioned in Atharved. And we also know our Rishi Muni is talking about that we should do a wheat fast once in a week, extra wheat fast on the day of Ekadashi. And in Ekadashi, they talk about wheat and rice both. And then they said 4 Navaratras in a year of 9 days each. That means 36 days of wheat off in Navaratras, 12 Ekadashi fast, and 52 Upvas, which total comes out to be more than 80, between 80 and 100 days. That means every third day you're supposed to have a wheat fast, as mentioned in our Vedic literature. Probably, were they knowing that Indians are more prone to get gluten sensitivity?
I can't say that. I really cannot document that at all. But certainly there's merit in saying that when you remove the grains, by default, you're going to increase the intake of fruits and vegetables in your diet and perhaps nuts as well. And those are the protective elements in our diets, which we really must have. So maybe that was their way of boosting those to get the benefits and to focus on those more than being grain centric. And also, I would just make a remark on the fact that grains, by and large, tend to be inflammatory to the gut. Like I began before, they do have certain kind of components, including lectins, etc., which can cause problems in digestion. So maybe they did understand that at a certain level and wanted a little break from those to introduce a good.
Again, I go back to the Vedic literature. There is mention of puffed rice all over. And if you talk about Krishna with puffed rice, and if you talk about Kubera incidents, till Ganesha was offered puffed rice, he was eating, and eating. We have mentions of wedding rituals of rice, but there is no mention of wheat anywhere in any ritual. We never heard of that anywhere we have talked about wheat.
That's so interesting. I mean, that really is a pointer in the direction that maybe they found that uh, rice was more easy to digest. And in fact, I think in northern India, typically if you have any digestive like diarrhea or disturbance, we just go back to khichdi, and that's the easiest diet for any patient to eat. So I think they perhaps had some sense that they were doing it. And I think drawing from that as well goes back to the same wisdom or going back to what our ancestors had said. And I think now the fact that we have meddled with wheat so much, it is becoming more and more toxic.
So when we talk about gluten sensitivity, what about casein in the dairy product sensitivity simultaneously with the grain?
That's very interesting too, because most we have talked a lot about lactose intolerance among people as we grow into adulthood. But I think there is now enough evidence to suggest that, like gluten, which is hard to digest, casein in patients with gluten sensitivity is also we can't make generalizations, but it is believed that about 50% of people who have a gluten problem do not handle dairy very well. So I think there is case in looking at.
So when you say casein sensitivity, what they can take and what they cannot? Can they take lassi? Can they take charge? Can they take eggs?
Well, not eggs. Eggs is not included in casein. Maybe it is all milk. And in fact, this is taking me to the diet which we are now very strongly recommending to children who have autistic problems, established behavior patterns, as it's called ASD. In these people, they are now going back to the origin of this problem in the gut, and a gluten-free, casein-free diet is the diet of choice, even among these children. So I think there is merit to look deeper into it, and to also address the fact that in India we have a different form of casein in the form of the desi cow, the cow which is giving the what we call A2 milk, and this milk does not have the inflammatory properties and is anti-inflammatory. So maybe it's very preliminary, but certainly there is a need to research that if maybe that protein is tolerated and not the A1 protein, which is the conventional cow.
So apart from gluten, apart from casein,
yeah,
what are other inflammatory diets?
Well, anything which is imbalanced, too much of processed food with chemicals and additives, etc., is inflammatory. Too much of sugar is inflammatory. Too many refined oils and trans fats in the diet are inflammatory, and anything which is overcooked and is baked sometimes has what we call AGEs, advanced glycation products, are inflammatory. So yes, the too much processing of food in general, along with additives and too much of sugar and flour, and of course the grains which are inflammatory should, and how can I not mention pesticides? Foods which are laden with pesticides and weedicides are highly inflammatory, and that is one of the reasons we find that maybe there has been a double, triple whammy with the wheat also changed, and our bodies were also subject to other environmental stressors, including the pollution, which is nothing but toxins and heavy metals in our system. Water is laden with chemicals, and we also have a lot of will also affect the gut. There is now an established connection between the gut and brain, called the gut and brain axis. The gut is also now called the second brain. So if we have a disturbance in the gut, we are going to have problems with inflammation in the gut, thanks to the change in gut flora. So yeah.
I want to now concentrate the next few minutes on non-celiac wheat disorders, because people who have celiac test negative, but they respond to a gluten-free diet.
This is a big, big area where I have the biggest challenge in management, because we don't have markers for documenting. We don't have accurate markers, I'd say, to document non-celiac gluten sensitivity. It is there. We have markers, and we need to work more on accurately diagnosing it and documenting it. But certainly, there are patients who come to me with blood test negative for celiac and still suffering from symptoms which actually just vanish so rapidly on elimination of the grains. I don't even have to say in the first my treatment, we don't even give gut support. We just want to eliminate the skin, and if we get the most amazing results. So this is a huge area, huge challenge, and we are doing the conference in January, on 12th and 13th of January 2019 in the India Habitat Center. We are getting experts from across the world, including Shanti, who is the godfather of autoimmunity. We are getting Dr. Marsh, who is the godfather of celiac disease, and we have several other experts who will be sharing their cutting on this area of non-celiac sensitivity with us. practitioners, it is seemingly a big burden because to take people off gluten in the absence of celiac disease requires a lot of what should I say validation and conviction, both in the in the practitioner's mind as well as in the patient's mind. And I have just a case I will share with you. That's coming all the time. This young man who's 32 has suffered from headaches and anxiety and hyperacidity, sinus problems, and aches and pains, brain fog, and a very bright young man. He says, but my academic career has been stunted because he was a good sportsman and a good musician, but academically he couldn't perform, and therefore he was, taken out of universities in the US because he wasn't able to focus, and attention was less, and he didn't study. So in 10 days of his follow up, he came back and said, and okay, he was also, he was sneezing, and all the time he had Otrivin nasal drops with him. He kept one in the car, he kept one in the office, he kept one in his home, and he was addicted to Otrivin. And the last 10 days on just grain elimination, he comes back and tells me that I'm a changed person and I'm feeling so much better. I've always wanted to gain weight and I have just not been able to gain weight. In 10 days, he has accumulated 1.5 kgs, which was a surprise to him. But more than the weight, the headache disappeared, the sinuses cleared up, and he feels much more energetic. He used to sleep after lunch, and he stopped sleeping, and so it's as quick as that. And yes, and this is and he is negative for celiac disease. And if we interpret the blood work, there is, documented, we can see malabsorption of iron and some amount of B12 and D, which is very, very
So
common.
I personally feel that when we have marriages and when we have conferences during Navaratras, we always have a separate section for Navaratra food. Why can't we propagate at a national level that whenever we go to a restaurant, whenever we go to a hotel, whenever we go to a party, in everywhere there should be a section on gluten-free section. Even in hotel, it should be made compulsory by the government of India that if a person is asking for a gluten-free food, it should be available. Restaurants should have a gluten-free section. If it is 1% of gluten-free, gluten sensitivity, and then 10% of the population, if it is suffering for that, there should be provisions for them to get it.
Talking to FSSAI on this, and they are getting stricter on these guidelines, and among food manufacturers to to give them guidelines for manufacturing and better labeling. But you are absolutely right, and it takes me to something which is I must share with celiac disease and gluten sensitivity in the Disabilities Act, which then mandates all educational institutions across USA to have a compulsory gluten-free menu and food available all the time. Like you have a vegetarian buffet, they will have a gluten-free buffet. And food manufacturers are, this is very tightly regulated. So I absolutely feel that, and whether it is celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity, the management really, the controls have to be there and in equal measure. There is no let off. So I think in Europe they are marking the menus in most good places. But I think what you said is absolutely the need of the hour, and particularly in when you're saying public eating and restaurants, on flights, and in schools and colleges.
So let's end with some take-home messages. The first take-home message is that celiac disease and non-celiac gluten sensitivity is common in the country. Non-celiac gluten sensitivity may be much more than gluten sensitivity. That's one. Any age group can be affected.
Any age.
So any age group can be affected with both the disorders. Three, when you say I can't diagnose, look for gluten sensitivity.
Absolutely.
Okay, that means keep it in your diagnosis. There's nothing like I can't diagnose, because before labeling them as psychosomatic or before labeling them or a non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Four, it's tactically curable.
Absolutely.
It's tactically curable, completely
medicine.
curable. Fifth, the results are dramatic. Even with 1 day of gluten fast, you may be able to get the response.
While the gut may take a year to heal, but the symptoms are completely, you can see the visible.
So therefore, go back to your weekly fast of a gluten fast, and if you are gluten sensitive, you will come to know immediately. You will come to know you are gluten sensitive, and in any way, even if you are not gluten sensitive, doing a gluten fast once in a week, as described in Vedic literature, also helps you in detoxify with that. And then don't forget to attend the international conference being organized,
the ISWD 2019 at the India Habitat Center. Our registrations are open. You can visit the website iswd2019.com. So look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you very much, and taking home inspiration from Dr. Aggarwal. We have always believed in our Ayurvedic wisdom, Jaisa An, Vaisa Man.
So food is Brahman. That's what most of the Upanishads talks about. Therefore, everything is in your mind, and the mind is in your gut, and gut is basically depends upon your food. So change the food to live healthy and be happy, both in your physically and mentally. That's all for today. Let's thank Ishi to be here with us. We will come back to you with one more show later on a regular basis with Ishi on different aspects of nutrition. We'll see you again. If you like this program, kindly forward it, share it with people. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
दोनों कंबाइन कर दिया मैंने
बढ़िया.
लंबा कर दिया मैंने दोनों कंबाइन कर